Welcome back to Mia's Life with Books. Today I'm going to be doing my October wrap up, and I read 10 books in October. For the last week of October I was at home because it was my reading week for uni. I did work Monday to Friday as well as spending time with my family and my boyfriend, so the reading took a bit of a back seat. So I didn't finish a book in that week, but I was reading Cold Wire by Chloe Gong, which I have now finished, but obviously I finished that in November, so you'll have to wait for the November wrap up for that one. So technically speaking, these 10 books I read all in the first 3 weeks of October, 3.5 weeks, so I still think that's a pretty successful month. 10 is kind of close to my average books I read a month anyway, so I think we did well. We had a bit of a mixed bag in terms of rating. There were some high ratings and a lot of books that I did enjoy, but there were also a couple that I was very disappointed with. But I think overall it was a good month. So before we get into the reviews, let's just do some stats. So as I mentioned, I did read 10 books, and of those 10 books, we actually had an equal split between ebooks on my Kindle and physical books. So I read 5 ebooks and 5 physical books. And I think it's quite nice to have a split like that. I think that worked well, and I enjoyed kind of having an even split. And of the 5 physical books I read, one of them was a reread, and one of them was a library book. So just throwing a little bit of an extra stat in there for you. Genre-wise, it was very thriller heavy. We were in the month of October. I did a couple kind of thriller-themed reading vlogs. So in the end, I did read 7 thrillers, 1 fantasy, 1 children's fiction, and 1 general fiction. So we still had a bit of a range in terms of the fact that there were kind of 4 genres covered there, except the majority of the books were just thrillers. Thrillers in October are a must, so I'm not displeased with that. In terms of rating, I actually have an average rating of bang on 4 stars, which I think is very good for a rating considering some of the books were a bit lower than some others. So I think that works out to be a nice average rating. Tiny bit lower than last month, which is also interesting considering I read more books this month. But as I said, 4 stars for an average rating is pretty good. The children's fiction book was also the reread, so I did not rate that book, so I haven't included that in this rating stat. But of the books that I did rate, I had 1 5-star, 2 4.5 stars, 4 4 stars, and 2 3 stars. One of which I keep flitting between 3.5 and 3 stars, but I think I've kind of kept it at 3 stars. So yeah, overall, considering the majority of the books were 4 stars, I think that's still pretty good, especially because only 2 were under 4 stars. So like I said, it's been a success. But without further ado, we've got a lot of books to talk about, so let's just get into the books now. So the first book that I finished in October was Death at Morning House by Maureen Johnson. This was one of the books on my 25 books to read in 2025 reading challenge list, and I really enjoyed it. This is a YA thriller mystery, and in Death at Morning House we follow Marlowe. Now Marlowe has some issues at home. She's kind of caused this big accident when she was house sitting. She accidentally ended up setting fire to the house that she was house sitting for. So because of this, she kind of feels like she wants to get away from home for the summer. So when an opportunity comes to be a tour guide at this mysterious abandoned house with a famous past on this island far away from home, she agrees, and we follow her journey at this house. So Morning House is famous because back in the 1920s, tragedy struck the family that were living there as 2 of the children lost their life. So we kind of have Marlowe turning up. We've got some mysteries in the present day as well surrounding the people that she's doing these tours with, but we also have the mystery of what actually happened in the past and how all these secrets are coming out and trying to figure out what the truth is from the past timeline, but also some aspects of the present timeline. And things also just start to get more and more mysterious in the present timeline as well for Marlowe and her fellow tour guides at Morning House, and so there's just a lot of mystery and secrets. I feel like I did a really bad job explaining that. I feel like I did a much better job of explaining it when I was reading it in the 25 books to read in 2025 reading vlog. But anyway, that doesn't matter. I honestly just really love Maureen Johnson's writing. I think there's a definite kind of witty sense to her writing, and I think it worked very well in this book, especially because Marlowe as a character was quite witty, and I feel like it kind of portrayed her inner monologue in a way that made sense and kind of relayed her character really well. She was also just a really fun character to read, and I also liked seeing how she interacted with the other people on the island and the different relationships she built with these fellow tour guides that she had, especially because these tour guides were all kind of in a friendship group before, like they've grown up with each other, they're all really good friends, they already have a set relationship. So kind of seeing Marlowe have to almost infiltrate their friendship partnership in a way, forge her own connections with them. That was something interesting to see. Added a different layer to the plot so we weren't just focused on the whole mystery aspect. I always think in YA thrillers and mysteries especially, there is a more focus on the characters and on character relationships, which I really enjoy, because I think it adds a lot more impact to the story when you're getting to know your characters more and they're making relationships which make you more emotionally invested in the story. So I think that was done really well. We also did have a timeline from the past as well as a timeline from the present, and I also think that was done very well. They were both very interesting and they were both full of different twists, and yet they were still kind of brought together and connected, especially at the end. And I think that was quite a seamless connection, and it was done in a very satisfying way. All the different questions you had from both timelines were all answered by the time we got to the end of the book in a very satisfying way, and they were all just quite interesting, and also it felt quite enlightening to find out certain reveals and for things to finally click into place and for you to notice kind of little details that you didn't notice before, and then have explanations for why certain things were certain ways. I also think in particular the past timeline was very intriguing because the family that we followed, there was a lot of different layers and dynamics to them. They were definitely giving cult vibes, so that in itself is interesting. It was the way the different characters interacted with the fact they were literally a cult, and also how they all had different personalities and different things going on. So it was just interesting to find out the events that led to the tragedy that we knew about, and seeing how those events were leading up to that and how it was all unfolding and what each character had to do with those events, if that makes sense. They were just very interesting to read about, I think. I also just think the setting in general of Morning House and kind of on this isolated island made it very atmospheric, and it definitely added to the sense of strangeness that was going on in both timelines. Overall, I did really enjoy this. I think it was a great premise. I think it worked very well. I just had a lot of fun with it overall, and this was one of the 4-star books. The next book that I read was Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, which again was another book on my 25 books to read in 2025 list. And I don't know why it took me so long to read this book, because I actually had a really good time with it, and I also gave this one 4 stars. So of course we are following Emily Wilde in this book as she, surprise surprise, is working on an encyclopedia of fairies. She is a professor and she does research surrounding fairies and folklore, and they're not your typical fairies that you get in romanticies. They're more of the typical folklore legend type of fae, and essentially there is one specific type of fairy that she would like to include in her research that no one has ever really done much research surrounding them, and some people aren't convinced they're even real, and those are called the hidden ones. So she travels to this kind of isolated cold village, a snowy cold in the middle of nowhere essentially. It's giving like small town vibes. So she goes to this village with nothing in mind other than researching her fairies. She's not really interested in forming any relationships with any of them. She's purely just there to get her research done. However, one of her colleagues suddenly appears in this village and offers his assistance without her offering, so she is a bit reluctant at first to kind of have him there helping her with her research, especially because they're kind of rivals in the sense that they are working in the same realms of research, except her rival Wendell gets a lot more recognition and is a lot more well known in that scientific realm. However, they are also kind of friends, so it's not rivals in the terms that they just flat out don't like each other. Wendell is kind of the opposite of Emily in the sense that he is very outgoing and he likes to make lots of these connections, and he's a lot more laid back in terms of his research and his work. So Emily's a bit reluctant in the sense that she feels like he's going to get in the way, and she likes her research to be done in a very set way. And obviously now that Wendell is here, she kind of doesn't have a choice but to accept him into her research, and that means that her work doesn't necessarily go to plan as things have changed a bit with his arrival, but we do just follow them researching this folk and it just goes from there. But it was so much more than what I just explained. I feel like I explained that again in a very kind of higgledy-piggledy way. I don't know if that made much sense. But anyway, I still feel like that is a very basic summary, because I do think it is so much more than that, and I was expecting it to purely just be kind of that situation, as a lot of people have said to me it is very cozy fantasy, and don't get me wrong, it was cozy fantasy, but there were also a lot of darker things going on and darker themes. There was definitely a sense of higher stakes in certain situations. So while we did get the cozy vibes and the cozy kind of atmosphere, we also did get some darker elements that were happening, but I think that made it a lot more interesting than I was anticipating it to be, because as much as I do like a good old cozy read, I think when you can find a good balance between that coziness and also having kind of a high stakes, interesting plot with more things happening, I think that can work really well. And I think this is an example of that, because it was so cute and whimsy, but it was also so much more, and I just was not expecting that. And I feel like that kind of sums up my feelings for this book, is that I was just not expecting to feel how I felt about it, because I just enjoyed it so much more than I was expecting. I also just think the characters were so much fun. There were so many likable characters, and Wendell in particular is one of them. I just love that man so much. And there was also kind of a few layers of mystery to him and a few different layers of his character that I wasn't necessarily expecting. So I think that added a lot of character depth to Wendell. And I think Emily as a protagonist felt very unique to read as well, but also was really nice to kind of be in her head and to see her passion for the Fae and the fairies and her research. And I also think it was nice to see her character development in terms of letting a few more people in and making those relationships that she was reluctant to make in the first place. I'm looking forward to continuing this series. I definitely really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. All good things, all positive things, and I would recommend it. Then I reread The Illustrated Mum by Jacqueline Wilson, because I then went on to read Picture Imperfect, which is the adult sequel to The Illustrated Mum. I'm going to talk about these both together, and I'm also not going to go into too much detail because I have a dedicated reading vlog just to these 2 books and my experiences reading them. And there's also a whole review of Picture Imperfect on my booktok. I honestly really enjoyed my time rereading The Illustrated Mum and then reading Picture Imperfect. I think rereading The Illustrated Mum really made me feel more invested in the characters for when I read Picture Imperfect, and it made this book have a lot of a bigger impact on me. And I still think I would have come away with a lot of the same feelings and emotions and thoughts, but I also do think emotionally I was more invested and it did have a bigger impact on me. The Illustrated Mum was obviously the book that I didn't rate, and I just didn't rate it. One, because it was a reread of a childhood book, so I feel like the nostalgia and that kind of aspect to it would kind of maybe bias my rating a bit, but also because it is a children's book. I'm not necessarily the target audience for it anymore. I just wasn't sure how I would quite go about rating it anyway, but I did really enjoy my time reading it, even though it was quite emotional and sad because it does deal with difficult topics. In The Illustrated Mum, we are following Dolphin and her older sister Star and their mother Marigold. Now, Marigold struggles with a lot of mental health issues and some addiction issues, and she's not always 100% capable of taking care of Star and Dolphin, or even herself. So it's definitely more of a almost character study, slice of life kind of vibes, just following Dolphin, dealing with kind of what's going on with her mum and how that affects her. And there's a lot of change happening in their life as well, as Star is introduced to her father. So that's The Illustrated Mum. And then Picture Imperfect follows Dolphin when she is now grown up and she is the age that Marigold was in The Illustrated Mum. So we still have the struggles of Marigold being portrayed here, but there's also a lot more of a focus on Dolphin and how she's kind of at a point in her life where she's not sure she's where she wants to be, and she has to try and find out where she wants to be, who she wants to be, and kind of just what she wants in life. So that's essentially these 2 books, and I do think they were both very well done, especially for the audience that they're intended for. I think in Picture Imperfect we have a very much more intelligent and educational discussion surrounding Marigold's mental health problems, whereas in The Illustrated Mum it's obviously written for a much more younger audience, so it's not necessarily as intelligent of a discussion, but I think the representation was still very well done for a child's point of view. So both these books do deal with very tricky topics. There are also some very heartwarming moments, there are some very beautiful moments in these books, and I really enjoyed going on the journey with them, even if it broke my heart multiple times across both books. I did give Picture Imperfect 4.5 stars, which I think is also probably a testament just to how much I love Jacqueline Wilson and how much I've kind of loved her and grown up with her as a reader. So I think part of me is always going to be a little bit biased towards Jacqueline Wilson books anyway. And again, because I felt so emotionally connected to these characters, I just was rooting for them the whole way through. So I think that probably adds to why I gave it such a high rating. I would still definitely recommend it, especially if you've read The Illustrated Mum and were a Jacqueline Wilson fan when you were younger or still now. I would definitely recommend these books. If you want to see even more of my thoughts, like I said, I've got a full reading vlog dedicated to them. Then I started my Reading Riley Sager's books for a week reading vlog, and the first book that I read in that vlog was The House Across the Lake. In this book we are following Casey, and Casey has come back back to her family's lake house just to have a bit of time away from the spotlight, as she is a famous actress. She's struggling with alcoholism, which is what led her mother to kind of encourage her to go to the lake house just to have some time out and some time away. However, the last time she was at the lake house, her husband drowned. So obviously being back at the lake house, it is bringing up certain memories for her and making things a bit harder for her. So you definitely get to see her struggles. But while she is there, she finds these binoculars that belonged to her husband, and she uses them to spy on the house across the lake. And while she is spying on them, she sees some peculiar things, some interesting things, and she begins to believe that potentially Catherine, the woman who lives there, could potentially be having some issues with her partner Tom. Things seem a bit tense, and she's just a bit worried, especially because Casey has begun to befriend Catherine. At first, I thought this was a great premise. I was very interested. I was wanting to find out what was going to happen next. It did take a little bit for me to get into the book, but it wasn't that I wasn't enjoying it. I was just kind of like, yeah, this is okay, like I'm going along with it. And then it started to pick up and I became a lot more invested until we hit the 70% mark. And that is where it went downhill. And that is why I am so conflicted about this book and why I keep flitting between ratings. This is the book that I said was a 3-star, but also kind of 3.5 stars. My original thought was 3.5 stars just because I did really enjoy kind of the middle section of the book. And first 70% as a whole, I think, could have been 4-star worthy if we'd have kept going along those lines. However, the twist at the 70% mark just felt so outlandish and silly to me, and I don't always mind suspending my disbelief. I think if it's done well, which Riley Sager has done multiple times in the past, I can really enjoy it. However, this time it just didn't work for me, and I'm not sure entirely why that is. I just did not enjoy the twist. I did not enjoy where it took the book after that point. For me, that was giving probably even less than 3 stars for the last 30%. So that's where I'm kind of a bit conflicted. As I've thought on it, it's kind of slowly gone a bit more towards the 3 stars opposed to the 3.5 star. I don't also know if that's just because I'm focusing on my negative feelings and kind of forgetting how much I was enjoying the book before we got to that point. But also I do think if that's how I felt at the ending, then maybe it should just be a 3-star anyway. So I am still a bit conflicted on the rating there, and also a bit conflicted on whether I would recommend it or not, because like I said, I did enjoy the majority of this book, but I can't say I enjoyed where it ended up. So it's just hard for me whether I'd be like, oh, I would definitely recommend this. So I don't think I necessarily would. Out of all of Riley Sager's books, this would be the one that I'd recommend the least. So if you're looking to get into Riley Sager books, I don't think this would be the one to go for. Yeah, I was just unfortunately very disappointed with it overall. But then I read Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, and I gave this one 5 stars. So a big difference to The House Across the Lake. I honestly really enjoyed this book. Again, this is one that I have like a full review for on my BookTok, and I spoke about it a lot in the vlog that I did. So I'll try and be a bit brief as well. I feel like I've explained the synopsis of this book so many different times. Essentially, we're following Mallory, and when Mallory was a child, she moved into this big Victorian spooky mansion with her family. However, they only lasted there 3 weeks before they ran away in the middle of the night, leaving all their stuff behind. Now, flash forward to the present day, Mallory's father has just passed away. And upon leaving this house when Mallory was a child, her father had written this memoir about their time at the house, which went completely worldwide. It became a global phenomenon, and everyone always associated Mallory with that when she was growing up. And now her father has passed away, she has to go back to Banbury Hall and kind of face the ghosts of her past. Oh, because I forgot to say, they fled and said they fled because the house was haunted. That's a big bit that I should have mentioned. But Mallory isn't sure whether she believes what was written in this memoir. So going back, she's kind of hoping that she'll find the truth out about what happened in their time at Banbury Hall. Oh my god, guys, I've been saying Mallory. It's not even Mallory. It's Maggie. Her name is Maggie. Please ignore me. Her name is Maggie. I don't know where I got Mallory from. But anyway, this book was so good. I was so addicted to it and addicted to finding out the truth behind what happened at Banbury Hall. The plot was honestly just so fascinating, and it had so many different elements and so many kind of strands of this overall mystery that was very exciting and intriguing and fascinating to follow. We also have the book within a book trope. So we did get chapters from this memoir that her father had made, and that added so much atmosphere to this book, as we were kind of getting parallels between what was happening to Maggie in the present day and kind of what had happened in Banbury Hall when she was a child. So I think that was really interesting, seeing those kind of comparisons as we were going along, but also how it helped us put pieces of the puzzle together as we were were going through. I just think it was really utilised well, and I absolutely love that trope. But also, those chapters from the memoir really helped create such a spooky atmosphere. They were definitely the parts that made me feel on edge and quite spooked at times, and I will never not recommend this for spooky season now that I've read it, because it was just so good. And I do think one of the things Riley Sager is amazing at is writing these atmospheres. There were also so many different twists and turns, but they all made sense. They weren't kind of crazy in the sense that that random one from the house across the lake was, but they all made sense, but were also still so shocking. Everything was, again, like when I was saying about Death at Morning House, how all of that came together really satisfyingly. Everything in this book did as well, and all the explanations made sense. I could see where we kind of got to them and where we got to those conclusions, but at the time I wasn't seeing them, so it still came as a shock. This book definitely kept me on my toes, and I absolutely loved every second of it, and I could not recommend it enough. The next book I read was With a Vengeance. Now this is like a historical kind of thriller. We're set like in the 1950s, and we're on a train. So we've got, again, a very interesting atmosphere that, again, I think Riley Sager did very well, but I will get more into that after I've told you the synopsis. In With a Vengeance, we are following Anna. Now, Anna has invited 6 people onto this train, essentially for vengeance, because 12 years previously, a tragic accident happened on this train that her brother sadly was a victim of, and also it led to the deaths of her father and her mother, as her father was the one who had the blame put on him. Her father was kind of the creator of this train, however, she doesn't believe he was at fault for the accident that happened, and these 6 people that she has invited onto the train, she believes were actually at fault. So her plan is essentially to get them all on this train and get revenge. However, the plan that she has meticulously planned out doesn't go to plan, because one of the 6 people ends up murdered on this train. So we're following kind of this locked room, isolated setting on this train, with lots of different characters with different motives, different backstories. There's just lots of different elements going on that all go together to create such a intriguing, exciting, atmospheric read. I actually think this felt quite different to anything Riley Sager has done in the past before. I'm not sure if it's just kind of the historical feeling or the fact that it felt quite sophisticated in writing style, but something about it just did feel a little bit different, but not in a bad way. It still had that signature writing style in the sense of the twists and turns and the atmosphere creation, but other than that, it did just feel a bit more sophisticated, and it just had a different vibe altogether. But I really enjoyed that, and it just felt quite unique, which I think is always a good thing. I will say at the start, I was a bit unsure whether I would enjoy this one, just because we were getting a lot of information about these characters, and it just felt a bit, not info dumpy, but it just wasn't as interesting, and it wasn't hooking me as much as Riley Sager's books usually do at the start. However, I then got into a bit more and realised all of that information was vital, it was necessary, and it helped you to become more invested later on down the line. So I kind of see why he did that, and I think it made sense. So it wasn't necessarily like a deal breaker for me or anything. Like I said, I did eventually get a lot more into it anyway. Once I was into it, it definitely kept me engaged, and I think part of that was down to the setting. I think it was so interesting to see how it kind of made sense for it to be on a train. I think there was a lot of thought that went into it, because a lot of the twists and turns, they kind of had to really make sense. You couldn't think, well, how would they have been able to do this? We're on a train. Like, everything made sense, and it was explained in a way that you could really picture it happening on the setting. I think that made it really interesting. It just did seem very well done, like I said, very thought out, and I could really imagine it happening. Things were very detailed, and I think that also added to the sophistication of the writing. Again, I just really enjoyed this one. I debated giving it a 4.5 stars, but I think in the end I settled on a 4-star, because it was really good. I just think I kind of got a bit carried away at first when I first finished it, with like the adrenaline of finishing it, but I have settled on a 4-star, and I think that's a good rating for a good book. Next, I read The Intruder by Frida McFadden. This was one that I have read physically. I've realised I haven't been saying which books I read physically and which ones I haven't. All of my physical books that I have read in October, I took home with me in November to swap them out for a few more books, so I don't have any of the physical copies here with me anymore. And The Home Before Dark was the library one, so obviously I don't have that one with me either. So that's why I'm not holding any physical books this time. But anyway, in The Intruder, we are following another Casey, just like in The House Across the Lake. And isn't it funny that The Intruder was also another book that disappointed me and that I gave 3 stars to. So maybe it's just something about Casey's, I don't know. No, obviously not. But anyway, in this book we are following, like I said, Casey, and Casey lives in kind of an isolated cabin in the middle of the woods, and there's this big storm coming in. However, when this big storm hits, she goes into her garden shed. I don't know if you can call it a garden because she's in the middle of the woods, but you know what I mean. She goes into her shed and she finds a girl there covered in blood, and she invites this girl in. So naturally, it seems like this girl has a lot of dark secrets. Casey almost starts to regret inviting her in, and that's kind of the basic plot of that. And I actually think that whole plot line I didn't actually even enjoy that much. I think once you got into it, it just became clear that what Frida was trying to make you believe was gonna happen just wasn't going to happen, and you could tell that it wasn't what it seemed like, and not in the exciting way when you're like, oh, that doesn't seem right, like there's something more to it. It was just kind of like, well, that's just not true, is it? Like, that's just not gonna happen. I just felt like I didn't really care for that storyline, because we did also get kind of another perspective that kind of follows this other story, which also follows a young girl. So there's kind of parallels between these two characters, and you're not quite sure how these two perspectives match together. It was interesting to try and think about how these perspectives did connect, but I did feel like when we did get that reveal, I was just kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like I did kind of see that coming, so it just felt a bit flat for me when we did get to that reveal. Overall, it was still fast paced. I was still going along with it, still reading it quickly. It was still very easy to read. It just kind of did all feel a bit meh to me, essentially. I wasn't fully invested. I was just kind of reading to read it, if that makes sense. I just think it's kind of predictable and a bit meh, and it just didn't really stand out to me. I did just feel a bit disappointed because there have been some books by Frida that I have really, really loved and given 5 stars to. I'm always hoping that I'm gonna find a Frida book that gives me the same feeling as I felt with those 5-star Frida books. However, this just wasn't one of them, and it did just really let me down. It was just a bit of an average read. I would still recommend it. It's still fast paced, a bit of fun, you know, with some crazy twists, even though they are a bit predictable. Probably not as crazy as usual, but I wouldn't really say no to reading a Frida book. Like, I will always pick up a Frida book because they are just fast and easy to read, and sometimes you do stumble upon a great one. This one just wasn't really it for me, unfortunately, so 3 stars. Then I read Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. I feel like I spoke so much about my thoughts on this particular book in my Reading Thriller Books for a Week vlog, so I am going to keep this one a bit shorter just because I remember speaking for so long about everything I felt about this book. So if you want more of my thoughts, feel free to go check out that vlog. Essentially, this book begins with Sally, who puts her father's dead body out with the bins because her father said to her, when I die, put me out with the bins. So what does she do? She put him out with the bins. Obviously, that is not necessarily a typical thing to do, and it causes her a lot of issues with like the police and everything, and it definitely introduces Sally as a kind of neurodivergent character. It's not necessarily diagnosed, but it is mentioned that she may be on the spectrum. She is such a lovely, fun character to read, and I really found it interesting being in her head and seeing how her brain worked. I think there was a lot of humour at times in the ways that she would come out with certain things. Like, she would be in a conversation and just come out with the most random kind of personal thing that would make kind of everyone else uncomfortable, and she wouldn't understand why, and it was just done in a way that was very humorous and witty, but not in the sense that it was mocking her, if that makes sense. So I think there was that very good balance of it being humorous, but also of it being like respectful and true to kind of her character. So I think that was always done very well. And obviously a lot more happens than just her taking her dad's body out to the bins. After this happens, she kind of does have all this media attention to her, and it brings to light some secrets and her backstory from when she was a child, as she was actually adopted by her late father and also her late mother. So we're kind of also finding out what happened prior to her adoption when she was a really young child, and it's actually quite dark and unsettling. So it was kind of nice to have these witty, humorous moments with Sally in the present as we were getting a past timeline, and just some also darker elements in the present timeline. That, you know, it was kind of nice to have that balance because a lot of it was dark and uncomfortable and upsetting to read and a bit difficult to read, but it was also done very, very well. And I think the way everything was revealed revealed and everything worked together was impeccable, and I really enjoyed it, even though it did sometimes make me feel a bit angry or a bit, you know, ill, a bit uneasy. I think it was a great book, and I think it was done very, very well. I would have given this book 4.5 stars if it wasn't for how it ended. I felt like we'd made so much progress and built up so much to a certain point with multiple storylines, and I feel like at the end it kind of just all crumbled away, and it was kind of, it almost felt a bit pointless because we kind of started back where we were at the beginning. And I think it would have been nice if that maybe had happened and then we started to see a bit more of a resolution. However, that's not what we got. It just kind of ended and that was it. And I just feel like it was almost a shame to end it that way. And also, while we did get pretty much all of the answers that we wanted, I still felt some parts of the mystery and things were ended a bit abruptly. It's like, I feel like there could have been more done with it. Even though we did get all the answers, I think it could have been done in a slightly better way. But I still loved this book. I gave it 4 stars, a very high 4 stars. I honestly did love it, and I loved Sally as a character. It just is a shame about the ending, but I would still highly, highly, highly recommend this. Finally, the last book that I read in October was The Butcher by Jennifer Hillier. I gave this one 4.5 stars. It was so good, and it was also low-key giving me Criminal Minds vibes because it's very centered around true crime and like serial killers and all that fun stuff. So as mentioned, we do follow this true crime kind of thing with the Butcher. Now, the Butcher was actually hunted down and shot by Police Chief Edward Shank. So we are following Edward Shank, Edward's grandson, and his grandson's girlfriend. So we've got those 3 different perspectives. So Edward Shank, he's now retired. He's just moved himself into essentially an active retirement home, and he has left his house to his grandson. And his grandson Matt finds something mysterious in the backyard when he's digging it up to put a new pool in or something. Finds this crate of interesting things. Then following his girlfriend, and his girlfriend Sam believes that the Butcher was responsible for the unaliving of her mother. However, her mother was unalive after the Butcher had supposedly been caught and shot. So Sam doesn't really believe that the Butcher is gone. She still thinks the Butcher is out there, or at least was out there. So Sam's trying to kind of investigate that and find out the truth with that. Matt obviously has this thing going on with what he found in his backyard. Then we've got Edward doing what he's doing in his retirement home. So we've got 3 different things, and also 3 different kind of situations and relationships to this idea of the Butcher and what it means to each of them. And it's all very interesting to get these different perspectives. Also, a lot of the time I had the urge just to shake certain characters and be like, speak to each other and everything will come together. But obviously that was the point of the book, is that, you know what's happening, but these characters don't. That is something that made this book feel unique, is you do know all the answers from the beginning. I won't say what those answers are because it is still a spoiler, even if you find out in the first like 50 pages of the book. It's more of a case of finding out how these characters deal with things and how they also come to the solutions and the answers that we already have. So it is interesting seeing them finding out different things and just kind of hoping that one day soon everything will kind of come together and they will all, finally find out everything that's happening. There were still some twists and turns that we didn't know that still shocked me and still had me on my toes, and that I just wasn't expecting. So it was still very interesting and engaging and did keep my interest even though I knew certain things, which I think just shows how good this was written because it was so engaging, even pretty much knowing a lot of the details from the start. I think it was just very cleverly done to keep your engagement. This book was honestly just wild and disturbing and unsettling, and certain characters I just really did not enjoy for various reasons, but I just couldn't put the book down. It just was so gripping. You couldn't look away. And I do think the characterization on this was very complex. I feel like everyone had a lot of character depth and a lot of character development and different things going on. Overall, I just think this book was really, really good. It was so good. I just really enjoyed it. I think it was an incredible thriller and I definitely would recommend it. Finally, we are at the end of my October wrap-up. My favourite book this month was of course Home Before Dark, as that was my 5-star read of the month, but there were a lot of good standout highlights from this month, so I'm very pleased with it. I hope you enjoyed watching my wrap-up, and if you did, please do leave a like and possibly even comment. You can comment what your favourite read in October was, or any thoughts you have if you've read these books. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, please do subscribe. It would mean the world to me, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.